Alright guys, keeping the channel active. Remember, if you like these videos, if you want to like, sub, silly comment, share, whatever, it helps the channel. So let's do the story of one of the biggest changes I ever had in my life. Something that I've still had side effects from to this day. And it is 2008, when my doctors were telling me I could die and I was in the hospital and things were bleak. Things were not good. And it was one of the biggest changing moments in my life. And I got C. diff. And if you don't know what C. diff is, C. diff is something that you can get from taking antibiotics, or you can get from being in the hospital. More often than not, it's usually from, elderly people, but, my health is not good. And it can often give you like a lot of diarrhea kind of shit like that. Or if you get it really bad, it can become life-threatening and a very serious thing. And that is what, quotation marks, luckily happened to me, right? Just my luck. It all happened to me. So it was 2008, and I'd already been sick before then, right? You know what I mean? I had my thyroid nuked. I have all these cluster headaches, chronic migraines, surgery on my hands. I've had a lot of health problems before then, right? But definitely one of the biggest changes in my life was when I had C. diff in 2008. And what happened was, at the time, I had gotten prostatitis, I guess, supposedly. Doctor put his finger up my butthole, and they said I had prostatitis. Maybe I did a blood test too. I don't fucking remember. So long ago, but they stick your finger in your butthole and whatever. And the doctors gave me ciprofloxacin for this or whatever. Ciprofloxacin, however you say it, right? Which now, to my knowledge, back in 2008, it didn't have this warning on it. But now it does actually have a warning on the label now that it can, these flavonoids, whatever it is, can cause this kind of shit. But when I had it, it did not yet have a warning label on it. But anyway, so my doctors gave me ciprofloxacin, and oh man, I got insane diarrhea from it. Abnormal looking poop, right? And I told my doctors, I'm like, man, dude, my poop ain't looking good, dude. It is not looking good, right? And they're like, oh, just keep going. You have diarrhea all the time anyway. Don't worry about it. And it went for a little bit longer. And I'm like, dude, something is really wrong with me, dude. This is a lot of diarrhea and my poop does not look normal. And I could probably find pictures of it somewhere. I'm sure I've had it, not in this computer, but maybe in some old files somewhere. But I don't know if you want to see pictures of my poop, but to give you a visualization, I was pooping out some just absolutely weird looking shit. It looked like almost like a weird sort of, have you ever seen like the Mario vine in old school Mario Brothers, where it's like a vine? It's like a vine. And it was just like my poop was no longer like a log. It was like a weird little vine with little like wires sticking out of it, like little like clumps. It was just weird as fuck looking, right? And I'm like, man, something is not good. And they even, you did like a poop study at some point. I gave them my poop, and my doctors told me it was fine. They told me it was fine, but this is before I was actually looking at my health record, which I'll get to. And I'm like, man, I don't think so. Something is really wrong with me. And my doctors, I don't remember the exact time frame, but I think this went on for, God, I dare say a couple months maybe or something like that. I'd have to go back. I remember exactly when I was in the hospital, but I'm trying to think of exactly how long this was going on. And I was getting worse and worse and worse. Like I started having trouble eating anything. I started to have trouble moving. I was in and out of the ER, and I remember I'm like, man, are you guys sure my poop is normal? And at some point, I pooped out one of the weirdest fucking things I've ever seen. It didn't even look like poop. And I gave it to the doctors, and they're like, oh, no, it's fine. And I'm like, are you sure? And I remember I was at a hospital for a doctor appointment, and I almost collapsed during the appointment. And the doctor's like, stop the appointment right now. Go to the ER. I went to the ER. And they kept me for a day, and then they let me out once I could start moving around again. Like, hey, make sure you see a doctor after this. And I'm like, dude, I'm trying to, right? And then I think I was back in the ER again, like the next day, something like that. They eventually let me out. And man, I remember my brother started having to drive me around because I started having trouble even moving on my own. And then eventually I had my PCP appointment, and I could no longer move on my own. And my brother drove me to the appointment and they carried me in. And the doctor was like, oh shit. And she's like, Clayton, I don't know why they didn't tell you, but you've been testing positive for C. diff this whole time. And I was just completely, that my brother was carrying me around at the time. And I'm sure if we could actually go to where the doctor's office was, I remember exactly where I was just like slunched over in the corner because I couldn't move. And I remember they shot me with some shit to try to get me moving again. And who knows what it fucking was, right? And they're like, we're calling an ambulance right now. You could die. You know what I mean? So I was fucked up. Anyway, so I ended up being in the hospital for about a week. And man, that was a huge changing point of my life. And, doctor saying you could die. They're like, hey, do you want to write a will? And I told the story before. That was definitely a big wake-up call moment that I had because, I had such a bad life before then. Not such a bad life, not a good life. I'm sure lots of other people have bad lives too. So I shouldn't say it like that, but I have certainly had a lot of fucked up shit happen to me, more than a normal person, right? And I remember always praying to God to save me. And I remember, when my doctor was telling me that I could die, and man, you were so fucked up. I've had so many points in my life. And I'm thinking about this now, of course, too, because I'm not playing a lot of video games whatsoever right now. And I've also been pretty sick on and off as well, getting dizzy and, reflecting on things. And I've always given this example for an example of how sick you can be. I've been so sick before where I don't even know if you start having crazy thoughts. You're like, will I ever be able to jack off again? That's the kind of like sickness I try to convey, where you have times where if someone was trying to kill you, you were so messed up, they would be able to kill you. You can't defend yourself. You have thoughts of like, oh my God, I can't move. Will I ever even be able to jack off again? Weird, crazy thoughts. So, and I remember thinking like, man, why am I always praying for my doctors to save me? I'm praying for God to save me. I need to start saving myself. And then another thing that happened, and again, this is like a more longer-winded story that I've told of this before, but I'm going to cut out a lot of stuff too. But just to say more stuff, you know what I mean. I remember, so I was in the hospital, and the thing is, I had never, and after they eventually let me out, and the funny thing is, they started giving me Flagyl too, which I should get into that story too. And I don't know if she's going to post on this, but I actually have met a couple of other people who have had C. diff from this and have taken Flagyl. And I know another girl, I don't know if I should say her name. I'll show her the video though, if she cares. Maybe she'll comment in. She also had C. diff and she had Flagyl and she's had permanent side effects from it as well. I know another girl who, thank God I didn't get as bad as her. She got C. diff multiple times and she had to get like the colostomy poop bag or whatever, right? So I remember they were giving me like Flagyl, and oh man, dude, Flagyl was just, insane. Like insane nightmares. And I've had permanent side effects like since then, which some people actually get once, I read about it now. I just have nightmares now. Like, of course I've had nightmares before, but now I just have nightmares. It's not like uncommon just to get nightmares. Like my sleep is really disturbed now. And I know I'm all over the place with this, especially because after you have C. diff, I told the story, it took me a year before I could even work out again. And I remember I was collapsing still pretty regularly for 6 months after that. And you're so tired and so fucked up. And the thing is, and you would collapse and I would just wake up in a panic from like a nightmare. So you can barely do anything, dude, right? And you're like passing out and you're waking up. And I remember very vividly, I could show you where I was right now if this was a camera. I remember making some chicken nuggets and I was just passing out so often. And I remember my family coming in because I had made some chicken nuggets in the oven and I was just randomly only able to eat. It took me a long time before I could eat a lot again. I was just randomly eating like a chicken nugget here, a chicken nugget here. And then I remember exactly where I was on the floor where I passed out eating chicken nuggets. Weird fucking story. But, and on the subject of, man, because C. diff, I have a lot of side effects. I remember, it took me, man, even when I was with friends, I think for years, there were still times that when me and friends would go out to eat, I would have to drive myself because I was randomly shitting myself for years after that. And I was like, I might get sick. I might have to go home. I don't know if I'm going to fucking shit myself. You know what I mean? It took me years before I could even eat a bigger quotation marks meal. An example, I don't eat it anymore. I can't remember the last time I ate it. Not that I don't think that this kind of food doesn't taste good anymore, but you know, my life is just so much about being healthy. But it took me years before I could even eat. Like, have you ever seen like Italian cheese bread, like a box of Italian cheese bread from like Little Caesars, or like just a box of cheesy? I like cheesy breadsticks, right? Just like a box of like cheesy breadsticks from any kind of pizza place, Hungry Howie's. I used to like the 3 cheeser kind of cheese bread, whatever. It took me like years before I could even eat a box of cheese bread. I just could not handle fucking cheese bread, dude. Sounds fucking retarded, but it's what fucking happened, right? And I can eat more now, you know what I mean? But I've had a lot of side effects from this. I've never been the same person, right? I've always my thyroid's had to be a little bit higher to function and all this kind of stuff. But man, I really went off on a tangent. But anyway, I remember they let me out of the hospital after so many days. You know, I was like, and the funny thing is they actually let me out early because what happened is they let me out because they said that I was finally able to eat again. But it was funny because, you know, when you're in the hospital, they're bringing you food to eat. And I think I was just giving my brother some of the food. And so they thought when they would take the tray back and they saw some of the food was gone, they thought I was eating it. And I remember the day they let me out. And they're like, well, we're going to let you out because you can eat again. And I'm like, I'm not really eating. And they're like, well, that's not what they said. And I don't remember if my brother was there at the time when they let me out anymore. But because my brother was at the hospital with me. But I don't remember if he was there right when they let me out, but I was like, dude, I'm not eating all this stuff. And man, the doctor, she was like, well, they said you ate, so you had to leave. And then I was right back in the hospital again. So fuck that bitch, fucking idiot. But anyway. So after 2008, and this is why I say it's one of the biggest changes of my life, because it took me a year again before I could even work out again. When this happened, when I realized that the doctors knew I had C. diff, and they let me get to the point where they're like, you could die. And it was a big change in my life, and still is because of my health problems, you know what I mean? But because I realized that my doctors did not necessarily have my best interest. And a lot of shit happened then. You know, I was suing my doctors, all this kind of shit. And trust me, you don't make a lot of money from suing a doctor where I live, unless like when you sue a doctor, I learned about so many bullshit rules. And like you learn, unless for like malpractice cases where I live, at least at the time, I don't know what it is now, you could only win $250,000 and the lawyer got to get half of it. And the only way you could make more than $250,000 was if the doctor killed you, which was then not relevant to me. I mean, what the fuck? I don't think it'd be relevant to anyone. Go to the fucking family. It's not relevant to you if you're dead or if you can prove you can no longer have a kid. So a lot of times where the money comes in, because then I also met people who did more successfully sue their doctors for more money, is what happens is you sue the doctor, there's that $250,000 thing that then a lawyer gets to take half of. And then what happens is you get money based on if you had progressed throughout your life through the job that you had. And so that's how more people are successful in suing their doctors, at least where I live. Again, I don't know if the malpractice laws are different now. I haven't looked at it. But so an example, one guy, you know, his mom died. And what happened is, so they did the malpractice case, but then they also won money, assuming that she lived for the rest of her life. So they also got every year that she would have been expected to work, and if she was progressing throughout her job. So then they got all that extra kind of thing. But anyway, blah, 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 blah. So more shit that happens. So I'm like, man, if my doctors don't really have my best interest, I need to start, like, if I was testing positive for C. diff this whole time and they didn't tell me, what else have I been doing, right? And I started seeing a new rheumatologist at the time. And man, I found out so much fucked up shit. And it was man, what a retarded kid I was. You think your doctors have your best interest, but I saw my health record and I started looking at this and I'm like, why does this say that I drink? I don't drink. And he's like, you don't drink? And I'm like, I don't drink. And he's like, do you know you've never had a normal liver test before? And I'm like, no. And he's like, do you know you've tested positive for Crohn's disease before? And I'm like, no. And like, the doctors just told me that I had irritable bowel syndrome. He's like, yeah, the blood tests are positive for Crohn's disease, and you have a colonoscopy that showed Crohn's disease. And I was like, what? It's like, I didn't know anything about that. It's like, yeah, your doctor said you drink. I'm like, I don't do any of that. And, it was such a fucking wake up call too. You like, I remember hearing like, oh, you have Raynaud's and all this kind of stuff. He's like, this isn't Raynaud's. He's like, you got Chobaine's lupus. This is like not just Raynaud's. You got like lupus. And I was like, wait, what? You know what I mean? I was like, what? And man, what a fucked up situation that became. And it was not a good situation. Like I said, I barely won jack shit, from it. Won jack shit. And I remember I had a doctor tell me, oh, you should feel lucky that, at least you're still good looking and you'll never have to work again. And it's like, what the fuck? Are you serious, dude? So it was not like I won some tons of money or anything like that. I basically won bullshit. One quotation marks. Oh boy. And it was scary too, because I remember at the time, when all this was going on, as I was getting sicker as the years were going on, because, I nuked my thyroid. And, there were weird things. My doctor was like, man, this is just, they're like, well, we don't know why, but you already have, man, I already had osteopenia as a kid. I had degenerative disc disease, bulging disc just as a kid. I'm like, how do I have all this shit? You know what I mean? And they told me a lot of bullshit at first too. Like, oh, we think, and I remember crying at a doctor once because they're like, yeah, we think that, well, we nuked your thyroid, we're using, you're on your thyroid medicine. We think, you should be okay now. All this kind of stuff, besides, you had surgery, these cluster headaches, whatever fucking you up. But there's also this thing called like fibromyalgia and like chronic fatigue syndrome. And we think you might have that. And I remember, I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I remember reading about that shit. I'm like, oh my God, there's nothing you can fucking even do about this. What the fuck? And I remember crying about it. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to get better, which, all these years later, I guess I'm never really truly better as well. But, I remember hearing that kind of bullshit. And then to find out that actually this whole time I had been testing positive for shit they didn't tell me. But they're saying that I drink. And I guess maybe the thought is they're like, oh, well, he's young and he's very active. Maybe he's just a kid and he's not telling us he's doing drugs or this kind of shit. And it was like, wow, dude, are you fucking kidding me? And I remember 2008, at one point I was testing positive for fucking primary biliary cirrhosis, which they're trying to give me a will for. I'm like, primary biliary cirrhosis, what the fuck is this bullshit? Like, my body was just, it took me, like I said, it's not a joke. It took me a year before I could even work out. My body was just, I was collapsing for 6 months after that. It was not fucking good, dude. And then they changed primary biliary cirrhosis to, and, I had like liver scarring and all this kind of stuff. And then they tested me, I don't know how much longer they tested me after that, but they're like, yeah, it looks like your liver's getting better. And they changed it to fatty liver disease at one point. And then they changed it to, unspecified liver disease, this kind of shit. And then, but of course, then I found out, I was like, well, I guess I got fucking lupus. And then I was testing positive for scleroderma. It was a lot of fucking bullshit. Scleroderma, they didn't tell me I tested positive for it till 2012. So that's skipping ahead. But anyway, it was a big clusterfuck. 2008 was not a good year. And again, it took me a year before I could even work out again and start doing stuff. And it was just, I guess that's a more longer-winded story of one of the biggest changes of my life, because I realized that I had to be the most proactive member of me getting better. Not that I was letting myself go per se, but I realized that I needed to find another stronger motivation in life, and that I couldn't rely on my doctors to get me better. You know what I mean? That's why nowadays in my life, my health has always been my most important thing. And a lot of times, actually, I think I'm too anal about it. And I feel like I'm killing myself sometimes with it. But, it's crazy to think. I remember it might have been 2008 as well. I mean, I was getting so bad that I remember even asking my doctors, because I was in so much pain. and I was just so fucked up, dude. I remember it's crazy now, and you probably look at me like, wow, you to think that this happened. I was even thinking about asking my doctors for a fucking handicap sticker. That is how fucking sick I was and how low energy I had to like do anything, which of course I guess, I was just so completely fucked up, much more fucked up than my doctors were telling me, you know. And it's crazy. Can you believe that? Like, I can't even imagine that now. Like, I mean, I went out for a walk today, and it took me a while before I could do it because I was really sick last night. But nowadays, I'm so motivated to keep myself healthy because I remember being in the hospital, doctors telling you could die, and I always remember like almost my whole life now being around old people, even as a kid, and now I guess I'm still pretty young compared to some of the grandpas and everything I see in the hospital. But, you know, man, dude, it's crazy to think about that. And I have that other story too. I always think about that. I was trying to go to school at the time for college, and I remember I was never able to finish because I was missing so many days, and the school just would not pass me. I couldn't even pass school because I was just missing so many days. And college, I mean, but because I got kicked out of high school, but they're like, yeah, it's like even if you're getting an A, we can't pass you because you've just missed too many days. And I've never. I could probably tell some more stories about the school stories that happened, but yeah, that was 2008. One of the biggest changes, maybe the biggest change, one of the biggest changes in my life for sure. And I know I always say that, man, if you're wondering about if the video game people that are reading this or watching this, if they're wondering, no, only a few people from the video game community even messaged me about it. Isn't that crazy? You think a lot of these guys are your friends. They're not your fucking friends, dude. Only a few people besides my real friends to say like even messaged me about it when my doctors were telling me I could die, all that kind of stuff. It was, it was, and I got a couple of bullshit messages. I remember stuff like they weren't even apologies for the stuff that they had done to me. They were like, maybe things didn't end on a good note, but let's be friends again. And it wasn't even apologies for all the lies they made up about me, anything like that. And then, of course, as years have gone on, I found out then, as I got a Facebook and I kind of reconnected with a handful of people, I found out that even some of these handfuls of people actually were talking shit about me on things like Twitter and all this kind of stuff that I didn't even really know existed at the time, even after I left the community. So it really goes to show you, who your real friends are and, what scum the video game community is in general. But anyway, yeah, that's a more long-winded. I could even go more long-winded because so much shit happened then. But that's a slightly more long-winded version of one of the biggest moments of my life and biggest changing moments of my life. The end.